Before I get started, I'd like to thank all my subscribers. At the time of writing, and since my last video, I have broken the 100 subscribers mark, which YouTube celebrates by sending a nice little notification to congratulate you. So thank you very much. You all keep this channel going and me motivated. Likes and subscribes and your comments are very valuable, so please keep them coming. Questions are welcome, as I would like to expand to a Q&A feature. So, this is a quick guide to the Albatros D.III, a pivotal German single-seat biplane scout fighter of World War I that saw service from December 1916 to the end of the war and beyond. If you haven't seen my presentation on the Albatros D.I and D.II, I recommend that you pause this playback, watch that video, linked below, and then resume. This specific video was requested by one of my subscribers. It is a significant aircraft for several reasons. The first, that it was the successful continuation, and arguably the culmination, of the design and development process that had started with the Albatros's D.I and D.II. Secondly, it was the first German scout fighter to be manufactured in significant numbers compared with the Allies. Its predecessors, the Fokker Eindecker, Pfalz E-1, Halberstadt D.II and III, and the Fokker D series had, by the end of 1916, totaled roughly 1,200 units. Compare this with the contemporary Nieuports, some 5,400 of those were manufactured. Though there were more demands upon Allied fighter production, this is quite a disparity. The Albatros D.III production numbers reached 1,900 plus, more than all the previous scouts combined. Finally, it and its stablemates were to prove the nemesis to Allied fighters during bloody April of 1917, which, though a German tactical victory, was actually an Allied strategic one. Development of the Albatros D.III came quickly upon the heels of the D.I and D.II. Indeed, as those types were entering combat service in August of 1916, the D.III was already undergoing flight testing. Albatros lead designer, Robert Thelen, was not letting the grass grow under his feet. His previous designs can be considered prototypes, and he responded quickly to requests for improvement. Pushing development forwards was the observation that the D.I and D.II was somewhat lacking in the maneuverability department, and the impression left by the Nieuport sesquiplane aircraft. Indeed, the latter was thought of highly enough that some captured examples were rearmed and put into German service. In quick summary, the sesquiplane layout was an attempt by Nieuport's chief designer, Gustave Delage, to combine the benefits of monoplane and biplanes. As a result, the lower wing was quite a bit smaller than the upper. To meet this requirement, Robert Thelen reduced the width of the lower wing and somewhat increased the span of both. From the front, the sesquiplane design really isn't particularly obvious, but it becomes clear from the side. Overall wing area was thus reduced. Though performance of the D.I and D.II were superior to the Nieuport 11s and 16s and the DH-2s against which it was contesting, it was marginal compared with the Nieuport 17s. Perhaps because of this, and because improved speed is always nice to have, the Mercedes 160p engine was tweaked to produce 170 horsepower. Not a huge difference, and combined with a moderate weight increase, did not result in significantly improved performance, although the rate of climb increased. This was to prove disappointing to the pilots that received it, though they did appreciate the maneuverability, which was significantly improved over the earlier designs. In this at least Robert Thelen had met his assigned design goals. Apart from the wings and engine, the rest of the aircraft remained quite similar to its predecessors. The Teves and Braun radiators, located in the central part of the upper wing, garnered some complaints. Depending upon who you read, this was either due to the plumbing from the engine interfering with pilot vision, or the risk of scalding the pilots' faces during combat should the radiator be punctured. To deal with this, the radiator was moved to the right upper wing. D.III shipped to the Middle East were equipped with two radiators to deal with overheating, but with mixed success, and the aircraft equipped with a single radiator were rather prone to overheating when the weather warmed up in 1917. A major problem occurred during operational service. The lower wings began to fail in the field. This was initially ascribed to poor production quality, and there is possibly some truth to this. Fokker, for example, was plagued by build problems throughout the war, and so it's easy to see that explanation being jumped on. Additionally, there is often a divide between designers, implementers, and the field, with each being quick to deny responsibility. During static load tests of the D-I, the rear upper wing spar failed not once but twice, and testing had to be delayed until a fix was found. Fortunately, this only took a couple of days. Wing problems were nothing particularly new to aviation of the time. In fact, problems in general were practically normal. Static load testing of the D.III wings in September of 1916 failed the required 5G load factor for pulling out of a dive and had to be strengthened and retested. In the case of the D.III, it is now generally understood that the problem wasn't necessarily build quality, but the design itself. In fact, failure of the sesquiplane lower wing occurred in new ports as well, although as far as I know this didn't result in the type being grounded. Initial fixes to the D.III involved reinforcing braces or replacement wings, which is sort of in line with the build quality accusation, as this sounds to me awfully like a quick patch. However, this proved insufficient, and the type was grounded in late January of 1917 until a fix could be found, which it was, although the problem never really went away. Not on the Western Front at least, and not with Johannisthal builds. 4 new different and strengthened wing designs were very quickly tried out, and by mid-February the grounding order was rescinded, although there is some evidence to suggest that the grounding order had only applied to those aircraft that had not had the reinforcing braces installed. Of the 5 wings that had been tested, the one chosen for the fix was the original, with the reinforcing braces. The problem is, as I have said, that this was a patch rather than a fix, and the design issue itself was never properly resolved. Inspections revealed that the lower wing interplane V-strut attachment bolt holes had widened to allow the entire wing to become loose and rotate 2 centimeters about the spar. Just reading that makes my skin crawl. Why this occurred isn't really known, but theories include vibration, unknown pressure distribution, or wing twisting and fluttering. Or perhaps build quality issues. I mention this because when I read that the bolt holes had widened, my first thought was that the metal was too soft and needed to be properly heat treated. However, I am speculating. As I have implied, this wasn't a problem on the Eastern Front, and this can be put down to the manufacturer, because Österreichische Flugzeugfabrik Allgemeine Gesellschaft, as they had with the D.II, went their own way and produced what is considered to be the best D.III of the war. There were 3 manufacturers of the D.III. In Johannisthal there was Albatros Flugzeugwerke, the parent company. A subsidiary, Ostdeutsche Albatroswerke, OAW, in Schneidermühl, and the aforementioned Österreichische Flugzeugfabrik, building under license for the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Production shifted from factory to factory, so the Johannisthal plant produced 508 D.IIIs, with last orders received in March of 1917. As production of the D.V was ramping up, production shifted to Schneidermühl. OAW's first production order was received in April of 1917, and they went on to build 838 machines. These 1,346 aircraft were all pretty much the same for our purposes, though OAW's lower wings were more robust as a result of Johannisthal's experiences. It's with Österreichische Flugzeugfabrik Allgemeine Gesellschaft, henceforth to be referred as ÖFAG, that the story gets really interesting. And I know the ears of some of my listeners will have pricked up when I said that, because the story of Irfag and the Albatros D.III is practically deserving of its own video. Irfag had been obliged with the production of the Albatros D.II to use a different armament and engine. With the D.III, while the German machines used a slightly uprated Mercedes 160P and twin LMG 0815 Maxim machine guns, the Austrians used the more powerful Austro-Daimler 185P and one or two Schwarzlose M0712s. Despite the minor increase in power, performance was more or less the same as the Mercedes-equipped aircraft, though rate of climb was slightly better. Issues with the Schwarzlose M0712s I've addressed briefly in the previous video, to which I should add that it was apparently sensitive to pressure changes at altitude and stopped working above 3,000 meters. Development to resolve problems of synchronization, rate of fire, and failure to function resulted in the Schwarzlose M16, but I have not been able to find out when they were fitted to Austro-Hungarian production aircraft. Irfag's production of the Albatros D.II ceased in May of 1917 and switched to the D.III. For our story, it is important to know that the manufacture occurred in 3 distinct lots. Now, I won't go into the meaning of the lot IDs because this story is long enough already and is not exactly pertinent. Suffice it to say that Lot 53 was the first and comprised 45 D.IIIs equipped with the Daimler 185Ps. These were superior aircraft to the German production, as the Austrians were aware of the wing problems and addressed them through more robust construction that included heavier plywood ribs, spar flanges of double the normal thickness at stress points, metal reinforcements between the spar and front stringer, and the problem of wing twisting was addressed by the employment of metal fittings. They were delivered between May and June of 1917. One thing I realize I haven't mentioned is the top speed of the Albatros biplanes. The D1, D2 and D3 had roughly the same top speed of 109 miles per hour. It is important to realize that this was the top speed new out of the factory and would vary considerably in the field. It's one thing to have a factory-fresh engine, nice tight fabric over the airframe, fittings unaffected by wear and tear, and a clean propeller. However, field conditions inevitably led to deterioration, and so performance dropped with use, so that a well-used aircraft going up against a factory-fresh opponent could suffer a significant disadvantage. The next series was the 153s. For this, Irfag redesigned the nose of the D.III for better streamlining and installed a more powerful 200 horsepower Austro-Daimler engine. Top speed increased to 116 miles per hour, and the rate of climb also increased. 281 were manufactured. In May of 1918, another 260 were ordered. Known as Series 253, these increased engine power again to 225 horsepower. Top speed jumped to 125 miles per hour, and the rate of climb increased once more. These improvements might explain why Irfag never switched production to the Albatros D.V. They had no reason to. The Series 153 and 253 D.IIIs were better aircraft. In fact, the 53 series probably were as well, although not quite as fast. Entering squadron service in late December 1916, the D.III was received with some enthusiasm by pilots. As with the D1 and D2, it was easy to fly, but more maneuverable, though somewhat heavy on the controls. That easy-to-fly description is an important one, as it means that it was more forgiving to new pilots. However, its firepower, rate of climb, and maneuverability meant that it was advantageous to experienced pilots as well. That it used an inline engine contributed to it being easy to fly. Single-engined propeller aircraft have a problem with torque induced by the rotation of the prop. In rotary power plants, the problem is greatly magnified by the mass of the rotating engine, which gets worse at higher revolutions. While the Sopwith Camel is most notorious for this problem, in fact all single-engined rotary aircraft during World War I would have suffered from this issue, which could be hard to deal with on the ground while taking off or landing or while going into a turn. For all of its positives, the D.III had a potential problem, apart from that of wing separation. From May of 1916, the British had started the introduction of the Sopwith Pup, and as far as I can ascertain, this was a superior dogfighter. If the Germans had been operating more aggressively over Allied lines, this might have been an issue. However, in April 1917, the Allies had no choice but to conduct support of reconnaissance missions behind German lines in preparation for the Battle of Arras. With the Germans standing on the defensive, and to some extent capable of dictating the terms of combat, this put the Allies at a significant disadvantage. Combined with better training, this resulted in significant losses to the Royal Flying Corps and enhanced the reputation of the Albatros Scouts. The D.III did not serve in isolation. Rather than immediately replacing the D.I s and D.IIs, it served alongside them, together with the remaining Eindeckers and Halberstadts, as well as the new Fokker D series. It was unquestionably the best of the lot, but became outclassed as 1917 progressed. Just prior to Bloody April, the Allies had seen the introduction of the Bristol F-2, the Spad S-7, and the Royal Aircraft Factory SE-5, all of which went on to long and successful careers. The Sopwith Pup was, of course, still in service, and from June the Sopwith Camel began to be introduced. While I would argue that the Albatros D.III was at best the equal of the best of its opposition from late 1916 through April 1917, it was rapidly being overtaken by Allied developments. By July, it was also serving alongside its nominal successor, the D.5. Nonetheless, it and its pilots had no choice but to press on, and the D.III continued in service, and indeed in production. OAW in Schneidermühl delivered their first D.IIIs in June, and delivery continued until late in 1917. This was concurrent with production of the D.5s by Johannisthal. However, the story of the D.5 will have to wait for another time. Despite the increasing superiority of Allied scouts, peak numbers of the D.III on the Western Front were not reached until November of 1917, when 446 were present. In fact, they continued in service through much of 1918, despite being increasingly obsolete, and at the end of August 1918, 54 were still in squadron service. On the Eastern and Italian fronts, the situation was a bit different. Aircraft obsolete over France were still seeing valuable service. Likewise in the Middle East. The UFAG production aircraft started to be delivered in May of 1917 and continued through 1918. As I have mentioned, they were, with the exception of the armament, the best of the D.IIIs, remaining current and competitive against all comers until the end of the war. It is perhaps in this arena that the strengths of the D.III are best illustrated. Its wing problems were fixed from the start, so that pilots need not fear their own aircraft. I know the armament issues were fixed, but not when, so that weakness was resolved. Performance increased significantly to the extent that away from the Western Front the D.III can be regarded as one of the premier fighters of World War I. This is a testament to Robert Thelon's design and work, and to the adaptability of the airframe, nor should we overlook the engineers at UFAG who were able to take Thelon's work and run with it so successfully. When studying the history of the D.III, one question remains uppermost in my mind. Why were the UFAG machines not manufactured in Germany? There are several possible reasons for this, but I'm going to focus on the one I think most likely. Basically, the UFAG machines didn't achieve their reputation until too late to be of use to the Germans. By the time field reports of the Austrian-manufactured machines would have reached the Germans, their designers had moved on to machines that, if not better than those of the Allies, were at least doing the job. The Series 253 D.IIIs that were the pinnacle of the design were contemporary with the excellent Fokker D.7. Which one was better is an interesting subject to investigate. The Albatros D.III service didn't end with the armistice in 1918. In early 1919, Poland bought 38 Series 253 aircraft from the factory, and 10 more were rebuilt. Due to infrequent air-to-air encounters, they were operated in the ground attack role during the Polish-Soviet War of 1919 to 1920. They remained in service until 1923. The nascent Czechoslovak Air Force also obtained and operated several Albatros machines after the war. Interesting to note that the war in Europe did not end with the armistice. It continued almost unabated in Russia and Eastern Europe for several years afterwards. As the D.III's reputation soared in Austrian service, that of Albatros had diminished considerably in German, and the introduction of the Albatros D.V did nothing to enhance it. Albatros had shot its bolt, and after the D.V would contribute no more of its own scouts to the air war. However, that is another story.